Anything white and powder is dangerous. Cocaine, sugar, anything like that, be careful. Flour, that thing is too purified. It doesn't have many benefits to it, and it's so concentrated that it stresses your body. Whey protein, whey protein too, guys. Welcome friends to another week's Q&As. This is week 8, joined by my lovely wife Lucy.
Hi guys.
Lucy will ask me another question from Instagram.
So the next question is by LoneWolf23. This question is, what's your opinion on honey? Does honey cause insulin spike when consumed?
Thank you, Lucy. So there's a lot of wolves on my Instagram. Did you notice this? There's 2 now. There's actually 2 wolves, so which is great. Also, my dog's name is Wolf too, so we like wolves. Anyway, so his question is about honey. Was it my opinion on honey, or just does it spike insulin?
That is your opinion on honey, and does it spike insulin?
Well, let's start with the insulin. So, or let's start with what honey is. So honey, okay, before we get to honey, let's talk about sugar. So sugar, table sugar, is 50% fructose and 50% glucose. All right? Glucose and fructose are the main things that we want to talk about when we're talking about what are called monosaccharides, which is one sugar. They're not combinations of sugars, they're single sugars. So fructose is what's found in fruits. Glucose is a sugar that our body runs on. It's what your blood sugar is. It's like a bread is turned into glucose in the body. Protein, when overconsumed, is turned into glucose in the body, or when the body is glucose deficient. Fructose can be, when you consume fructose purely, the body can turn it into glucose, but it does so at a very low rate. Okay. Very low. Unless the body is like basically hypoglycemic, unless it's very low in glucose, it will usually not convert much of the fructose into glucose. So what happens is that you end up having, when you consume glucose, when you consume fructose, almost all of it is turned into fat. And this is why animals, before they hibernate, will go and binge on berries or fruits. Because they know, I guess evolutionarily, they are aware that eating enough fruits, eating 1 or 2 fruits won't do this. But if you're like a monkey, some monkeys do this in Africa, bears do this, they go and eat 60, 70 fruits in one day. You will store a lot of body fat. In fact, you will store, if you eat that many, you'll store a lot of visceral fat, fat on the liver and in between the organs. But you also store fat generally. Fructose is immediately the body wants to do de novo lipogenesis and create fat.
Okay.
So, that's one thing. Fructose turns into fat easier. Glucose, when you consume glucose, it's only going to turn into fat usually when your glycogen stores are filled. So you have glycogen stores in your liver. Your liver stores glycogen, which glycogen is stored glucose. So it stores glycogen in your liver, and it stores glycogen in your skeletal muscle. What happens is people that are insulin resistant or have metabolic syndrome, which is a lot of the bodybuilders that some of them watch this, and a lot of people, I mean, 40% of Americans have fatty liver. That comes with metabolic syndrome. So it's very common. When you have fatty liver, your liver, the liver cells themselves, are so filled with fat. They're so filled with fat, by the way, guys, that the nucleus of the cell actually gets flattened out because there's so much fat in there. So when there's so much fat stored in these little cells of the liver, it can't store glucose as glycogen. It has no space. So no matter how much insulin you take, it can't store it there. So what happens is it tries to store in the skeletal muscle. But in people who are metabolic syndrome, also the skeletal muscle is resistant to storing which we don't know exactly why, by the way, guys. Don't let anyone trick you. Nobody knows exactly why the skeletal muscle in type 2 diabetics becomes, or insulin resistant people becomes like smaller and doesn't store as many carbs. But the point is, glucose usually will be stored in the liver and the muscle unless you have that syndrome. Now the thing is, that syndrome can be started by fructose, which serves the fat deposits on the liver, and the liver becomes less functional. And it's also, fructose is inflammatory by itself. The molecule itself is inflammatory to our bodies. To everybody watching this, fructose is inflammatory. But to some of you, and I test this for my genetics clients, some of you will be particularly have inflammation from fructose, particularly sensitive to fructose, including myself and Lucie, and many other people. It's one of the most common polymorphisms that affect your metabolism. So fructose in general is bad for everyone. Fructose is particularly bad for some people, and it can cause metabolic syndrome, which would lead you to not being able to use glucose as well. Now, I know his question was about honey, but there's a reason I'm explaining all this. So now you guys know about glucose and fructose. So where do you find glucose and fructose? You find glucose in foods. So something called the glycemic index indicates how quickly a food is turned into glucose, which is then I didn't mention this. The glucose is stored in your body with the storage hormone insulin. So that's what he was asking about. So the glycemic index and the glycemic load show how much a food like white bread or something like that will spike your insulin, because how quickly the sugar will come into the blood, and the insulin will need to store that sugar from the blood into the liver and into the muscle. So now the thing about this is, so some foods will have glucose, some foods will have sugars. So for example, maple syrup. Maple syrup is almost entirely sugar, not glucose and not fructose. What is sugar? Sugar, which is called sucrose, is a disaccharide. It has a combination of fructose and glucose in one molecule.
I see.
That's what sugar is. So the reason table sugar is so dangerous for you, well, that's a little complicated. It's because it's purified. Anything white and powder is dangerous. Cocaine, sugar, anything like that, be careful. Flour, that thing is too purified. It doesn't have many benefits to it, and it's so concentrated that it stresses your body. Whey protein, whey protein too, guys. I would put that along with the rest. In fact, let's think of it this way. Sugar, flour, whey protein, cocaine. We can put these all together and say these are highly processed foods that are white powders. They're dangerous. But sugar, why is dangerous? Not just because it's highly processed, all that, but also because the sugar itself has that fructose in it. It's the fructose component that is making your liver not able to function, putting your body in an inflammatory state, causing fat storage immediately, and make your body less able to use the glucose part of it. So table sugar is sucrose, 50% fructose, 50% glucose in one molecule, disaccharide. Maple syrup is mostly sugar, that disaccharide, but it also has some glucose and some fructose by itself, maple syrup, which is, by the way, my favorite, I guess, sweetener in terms of taste. Although I'm not Canadian. I really, one of the things that I most like about Canada is the fact that they have maple syrup. That's a great thing. That was a great, I don't like sugar. I don't eat sugar anymore, but it's a great thing that that nation developed maple syrup. So you have sugar, maple syrup. What other things can we talk about? Brown sugar is slightly less refined sugar. The wider it goes, the more refined it is. What else do people... Sometimes now they try to promote sugar. They say it's cane sugar, 100% cane sugar. Well, sugar is supposed to be from the cane. But what happened is this. I don't know exactly when. I think it was in the late 1800s. There was economic problems that caused the world to have difficulty importing cane sugar. So what happens is there were scientific discoveries in Russia, and then I think actually possibly in Canada, but a couple of scientific discoveries in the Western world that led to people being able to make sugar out of beets. So beets became a big supplier of sugar. But sugar, whether you have sucrose from beets or sucrose from cane sugar, it doesn't matter. So if somebody tells you 100% cane sugar, say that's poison. I don't care if it's cane or beet. Beet is just a cheaper version of cane. But now let's get into, before we get into honey, what is high fructose corn syrup? Corn syrup is made of corn, and it is made specifically, it's not natural at all. Of course, all these things are processed to some degree, except the syrup and the honey, the maple syrup and the honey. But corn syrup is made specifically with a gradation. So, for example, you may find if you drink some of those corn syrup drinks like Pepsi, or I don't know if Pepsi still has it, but like those green tea ones that are so popular in California. There are these healthy green tea cans that everybody drinks, Arizona tea. You look at the back, high fructose corn syrup. What are you doing drinking green tea with high fructose corn syrup? That's ridiculous. If you think that's healthy, you should just be drinking like a milkshake. I don't understand what you're doing. But anyway, high fructose corn syrup is worse than sugar in one way. You'll find the high fructose corn syrup in the back of your packaging will say HFCS, I have to think, HFCS, which is high fructose corn syrup. Then I'll have a number, 55, 42, I think 42 is one of them. 55 means it's 55% fructose, 45% glucose. So it has more fructose than sugar does as a percentage. So that's the danger. And also the fructose is separated.
I see.
So it has, you see what I mean? So high fructose corn syrup has separated fructose and separated glucose, and usually used to, at least the dangerous one, had more fructose. Now this HCFS or HFCS 42 or whatever, the lower one is more common. You see it these days because they realized that fructose was basically killing America. So that's when fructose got demonized, when people realized that corn syrup had fructose. So get back to honey. What does honey have? So honey has about 25% fructose and about 30% glucose. So that goes to about 55% in total. The fructose is the disaccharide, the monosaccharide. Actually, no, these are both monosaccharides, sorry. Fructose monosaccharide and glucose monosaccharide, 25%, 30%. And then it also has, the remainder of it has some more sugars. It has about 2% of the disaccharide sucrose itself, like table sugar. So it has 2% table sugar and has a little bit of maltose. Maltose is the disaccharide found in beer, which is actually 2 glucoses combined together.
Interesting.
So, guys, I know this may be confusing to you. You may have to watch this more than once to get an idea of it. Really, this kind of talk should be done with my whiteboard. I actually have a very big whiteboard in the house, you know, like a classroom-sized one. We should really film some of my things there, so I can write it down so people can see properly. But anyway, so honey has a less proportion of fructose than glucose, 25% to 30%. It has sugar in it, and it has maltose, which is also quite a despicable sugar. And it has, what's the rest of it? It has water, it has pollen, it has flavonoids, which I'll come to in a second, and it has trace amounts of minerals, I think magnesium and potassium. Trace amounts, not worth thinking about. So, why do people say that honey is so healthy? Because people are confused. Mainly because they're confused, right? The reason why honey is not used in coffees and things like that, and why honey didn't become as popular as sugar, is it doesn't digest into the liquid well. It stays separated. So it was not that popular. But it would have been. It used to be used in desserts all the time. Now people trying to be healthier, they will use the honey in their dessert. Well, what's the difference between using sugar and using honey? It has slightly less fructose than sugar. So it's 25% to 30% on average. By the way, guys, it depends on the honey and depends on the time of year. So some honeys, the less sweet the honey is, the more glucose it has. The more sweet the good honeys that we have in certain parts of the world, not in Europe, you guys don't have them, but we have good honeys in certain parts of the world. Those ones are very sweet. What I grew up on when I was a kid, my grandmother used to give us this. These ones are high fructose honeys. They have higher fructose. So it has, on average, less fructose. Sugar is going to have 50-50. This is 25 to 30. So it's a little bit less. So you could say it's a little bit healthier in that sense because it has less fructose. But also it has a tiny amount of flavonoids. What are flavonoids? Flavonoids are phytochemicals that are found in plants and fruits that give send to the body a signal. It's a toxin, actually. It's a toxin. Think of it as a toxin. It's a toxin, hormetic signal that tells your body that you're in a state of stress, and it causes your body to increase gene transcription in certain genes like NRF2 that lead to glutathione increases. Glutathione is the main antioxidant in the body. So hormetic stress, as I mentioned last week, I was saying what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I thought when I watched the videos, I was like, I shouldn't be saying that. What really, the way to think of it is this. Hormetic stressors like flavonoids in honey, as well as things you find in blueberries, as well as things you find in green tea, when you don't put corn syrup with it, it's useful. Those things they have biphasic responses. What does that mean? That means in the short term, in the low dose, they cause the body to have an upregulation. They cause the body to have a net positive effect, an upregulation of these glutathione and different things, and it has a little bit of toxicity. The toxicity isn't so bad that the net effect is positive. If you overdose on most of these toxins, these flavonoids or phytochemicals, you will have a bad effect. So if you take enough green tea extract, which is one of the reasons I'm careful with green tea extracts, I check how much milligrams they have. If you take enough, studies have shown that you will, in vitro, meaning individual cells in a dish, they will show toxicity. So if you take enough of that, if you take enough turmeric, and this is one of the reasons that a lot of these supplements are not well digested. Like turmeric, people are always trying to get a high dose turmeric or a well digesting one, or the worst thing, sometimes they take pepper with their turmeric. Because what they think is, and some of the supplements will have is, they call it biopeptine, something like that. It'll have a pepper. What does the black pepper do? It actually inflames the intestinal walls to allow forced absorption of the turmeric.
Wow.
But your body's not digesting the turmeric because it knows it's a toxin. It's used to these toxins from millions of years of evolution in the plant and fruit environments. It doesn't want to absorb that much of it. Which is one of the reasons that that animals are not a good source of phytochemicals or flavonoids. Animals eat, many animals consume honey, animals eat these plants and fruits, but you go kill the animal and eat the meat, you don't find much of these things. Why? Because the body gets rid of it. Okay. You find vitamins, but you don't find these. So I know this is a bit long-winded, but my point is, don't get tricked into thinking, oh, the honey is natural, it has flavonoids. No, it has slightly less fructose, and it has a very trace amount of minerals that's not that important, and it has flavonoids. Are these flavonoids shown to benefit health? No. The reason why they're not is because the sugar, the fructose, is overwhelmingly bad. It puts your body in it's a poison. This is poison. So you want to get your flavonoids from good sources. If you want to eat a sugary thing, fructose thing, and to get your flavonoids or your phytochemicals, look at berries. You know, berries are what I mostly recommend. I mean, because lemons and limes don't have that much fructose. Maybe apples a little bit, but not in the same league as berries. Look at those things. Now the fructose is also in the berries. But the difference is this. First of all, it's digested slower because of the fiber content. And second of all, the berries have such a complex array of phytochemicals that are shown in epidemiological studies to significantly affect human health. Significantly. There are thousands of phytochemicals. I'm not sure the exact ones that honey has. I haven't researched it, but it has some. Different plants and fruits have different ones, and it's good to have a mixture of them, but it's also good to pick the ones that we know have beneficial effects, right? So, like for example, cruciferous vegetables. We made that video last week on the hormetic stress of cruciferous vegetables. Cruciferous vegetables contain glucoraphanin, which comes from phytochemicals, and that combined with myrosinase gives you sulforaphane, which has a hormetic stress on the body. It upregulates NRF2. So my point is, to answer your question, my view on honey, if you're going to choose table sugar or honey, choose honey. Don't choose either of them. If you're going to choose maple syrup or honey, choose honey. I guess if you're going to add any kind of sweetener that's not like Splenda or something. Splenda would be better than honey, right?
So what other sweeteners do you recommend if somebody cannot get rid of?
Of natural sweeteners or generally?
Generally, like
stevia. Stevia is the one that I would go with the most. It's the safest one in my opinion and in the studies. But in general, I wouldn't be too worried about even aspartame. I wouldn't be too worried about any of them. Some of them are very powerful. Unless you really mega dose them, there's almost no risk of it damaging. Except, I mean, we talked about it last week. I mean, there's gastrointestinal, there's small things, but these things pale in comparison to the effects of real sugars.
I see.
Pale. But if you can't do that, if you need a calorically dense sugar, maybe then you go with honey. But don't ever think of honey as a health aid. Right. You know, unfortunately, in certain traditions, like in naturopathy, you know, these kind of like, I don't want to use the term witch doctors, but people will say like herbal remedies and these kind of things. There are traditions around the world where they think that honey is beneficial, that it's a cure, it's a medicine. Really, what you're probably doing is causing fatty liver disease. As I said, though, if you're going to take sugar or honey, just pick honey. Yeah. All right. Okay, that's all. Okay, thank you so much, guys, for listening. Sorry for being a bit long-winded. We'll see you next time.